Here we are then, the last disc in the entire collection. Let's get started with Screaming Skull, which is a 1958 independent American horror film, directed by and starring Alex Nicole, who hasn't really done much outside of this. This is another film to be featured in Mystery Science Theater 3000, and as we've seen with previous films, never a good sign. Let's take a look.
The Screaming Skull is a motion picture that reaches its climax in shocking horror. Its impact is so terrifying that it may have an unforeseen effect. It may kill you.
Well, we didn't get very far before she died. But now that you're here, it's going to be lovely again.
The film follows a woman called Jenny, who moves into a new husband's house. Turns out though, her new husband's ex-wife died in this house, and spooky skull-related incidents start happening, causing her to slowly lose her mind. Emphasis on the slowly, as this film is incredibly dull. It's got a very bare-bones plot, and it just sort of meanders around mundane conversations instead of focusing on any action or scares. It does have its charm with the effects, which got a few laughs out of me, but not enough to make the film enjoyable. In my opinion, the skull is the star of the show. Whenever it floats along or pops up somewhere, it got a good giggle out of me. The effects are cheap, but as I said, they're quite endearing, very 50s. The characters are all one note and forgettable. That is, except for Mickey, who is the simpleton gardener played by the director. Now apparently this film was all crafted by this guy so that he could play a character that he wanted to play, as opposed to playing some other character that some other directors forcing him to play, because he was an actor first, then he did this and starred in it. Why he chose this character though, I have no idea. Not only is he barely in it, but he's pretty terrible. But then again, so's the whole film. With only a 67-minute runtime, it's still managed to drag along. I think I'm going to leave it there for this one, so now let's move on to the next and final film.
Mickey! Mickey! Mickey!
The handsome one, isn't he? So cuddly and warm. When I was a little girl, I used to want to be a caterpillar.
Another werewolf film, it seems. Let's hope it's better than the last one that we saw. This one also doubles up as a vampire film. The Werewolf vs. Vampire Woman, also known as Shadow the Vampire, is a 1970 Spanish/German sequel film directed by Leon Kilmovsky, who together with Paul Naschy in the lead have done a total of 12 films in this werewolf series, titled Hombre Lobo, with this one being the 5th instalment. Little side note here as well, this is the only film in the whole collection to be in colour. Hopefully not to its detriment. The plot follows Count Vodemar, our werewolf hero, and together with two girls, he resurrects and then kills the vampire woman. Ooh. The plot's fine to this, It's a little by the books and trashy, but it's watchable. The pacing starts out pretty good, especially compared with the last film, but unfortunately dips quite drastically in the middle and then ends on a bit of a whimper.
People are afraid of those who live near the monastery. They think I'm crazy. You don't think I'm crazy, do you? I get angry when people think I'm crazy. Some say a werewolf tore open their throat. Even I have been under suspicion. No, I never killed anyone. No. People blab all the time. They say a lot of things about me. It is only lies they are spreading. Rumors, and none of them are true.
The characters are all fine here, with the standouts being the vampires for the uncanny way that they move about. Really adds to the atmosphere. The acting and dubbing are awful, but in a charmingly watchable way. Some funny lines here and there, and with the Spanish melodrama, it's great. The werewolf, he's not the best, but he's not the worst either. We get to see a lot of him, which is nice, especially compared with the last film that we saw, werewolf-wise. But there's no big transformation scene really, until the very end, and it's a little bit naff. The sets and the use of shadows work really well for the creepy vibes, but the big final battle at the end, the versus battle, vampire and werewolf, is massively disappointing. It just boils down to an uncoordinated tussle on the ground. Shame, really. I think that's all I've got to say on this one.
Genevieve?
Okay, time for the print. Screaming Skull is awful, as you probably expected. It's clearly a VHS rip and it flickers frequently throughout. It's also quite compressed, so the darks and lights all sort of blur into one, making it very difficult to figure out what you're trying to see. The audio isn't great either. It's got a very persistent hum throughout it, and it's very difficult to make out what the actors are saying, especially the lead actress. And Werewolf versus Vampire Woman, you know what? It's not too bad. There's a really weird thing that happens with it where the really lighter sections of the screen sort of judder about a little bit, sort of wobble. I'm going to try and show, hopefully, but I don't know if it'll actually transfer across with the conversion. Not sure. We'll see. It's not unwatchable, but along with a few compressed dark areas, it's not ideal. And there's a very persistent buzzing sound in the background of this one, and the audio clips quite frequently. Definitely not the worst prints that we've seen, but still very low quality.
She cries in the night. I think he expects her to kill him.
Okay, time for the case. And we get some spelling errors again. We've got this one here spelled unexplainable wrong. And there are some incorrect names here too. The director of Werewolf vs. Vampire Woman was Leon Kilmovsky. Guess they couldn't be bothered to type it all out. And this dude's name should be Andre Reese, not Andrew. Outside of this though, everything is correct, including the runtimes, which is a surprise. And on the disc, same as usual. Both films this time start with this weird border, which we figured out in the last episode was supposed to be this effect of a drive-through theatre. Shoddy work. Overall then, two very mediocre films. Both falter in the pacing, but both have charming moments. I wouldn't recommend Screaming Skull. If you want to see a skeleton in a decent film, maybe check out Jason and the Argonauts or Army of Darkness. And I wouldn't recommend Werewolf versus Vampire Woman. Difficult to figure out what to recommend with this one, really, though. Freddy vs. Jason. That's a good versus film. Get that one watched instead. Okay, time to see what links these two films together. Why do they share a disc? Bit of a stretch this time, but both feature skeletons and screaming animals. So there we have it. All the films watched and discussed. So join me next time when I'm going to be doing a little bit of a retrospective, see what we can make of all of this. And as a little aside, I have a letterboxd for those who use it. Old Man Chimes on there. If you want to follow me on there, I've made a list of all the films in this series ranked from best to worst. If you're interested in looking, little link just there for you. See you next time.